Biscuit! Biscuit!
And the we're just going to do a little bit of filming. Maybe brings that.
I'm Simon Glass, a filmmaker, Jewish and from Leeds.
Kiddish wine, New York State, Kedem.
These days work's taken me to London, but today I'm back home in Yorkshire.
How the weather in London?
This is my mum and my family. We're together for Passover.
It says Passover for dummies. They tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat.
I'm digging into the history of my community. It's about migrants who came thousands of miles to a foreign land, only to find poverty and prejudice. Among them were my great-grandparents. I know very little about where my great-grandparents came from, and it would be good to gain an insight into the identity that they had. Russian-speaking, Yiddish-speaking immigrants with no money, with nothing to their name, just wanting to make a living and find a way for themselves in this country and become British citizens. This is the story of the Jews of Leeds, a very British history. This is Moortown that we're driving through at the moment. This is where I grew up. I've always known it as a Jewish area, but there's no visible signs. I mean, you don't see any distinct Jewish figures. Nobody with the long black coats or black hats. And there are, so few signs of Jewish life. I'm with my mum, Beryl. Leeds has been our family home for 4 generations.
This is where I grew up, here. And they had this shop. My father had this shop here, which is now Barclays Bank. And I worked in the shop. It was a Jewish grocers and delicatessen.
Almost went over a dog. You still seem quite panicked while I'm driving.
I mean, I'm a real backseat driver.
I know, but I told you, I drove 1,000 miles across America, and you're still nervous about getting in the car. I can see you out of the corner of my eye.
I know, I'm too tense.
I know, you keep gripping, the side of the seat.
Okay. Not a typical Jewish mother in any shape or form, but when it comes to your driving,
any typical Jewish mother would typically say, "I'm not a typical Jewish mother."
Well, you can see I'm not a typical Jewish mother.
Hiya. How you doing? Good. Just saying, it's a lovely place in here. Very nice. Yeah. I asked Mum if she'd take me to somewhere that still does Jewish food. There's very, very few places like this left. But from the menu, it looks great. Yeah. Ira Silverman cooks the recipes my ancestors brought to Britain. She wants to check out my Jewish cooking credentials.
Do you like to cook?
I have done. I mean, one thing you did teach me was how to make knedlach.
We'll have a face-off.
That's a traditional Jewish dish. Yeah, it will be good.
I hope you've had some porridge this morning.
Yes, chef.
Yes, chef.
Yes, chef.
Yeah. No, I want faster, come on. So, now then, I want to see your rolling technique.
This is like a ritual thing.
No. So, I take about that much. Now, I want you to make that into a smooth ball.
Okay.
Well, let's have a look. Oh, not bad for a first attempt. Thank you. Off you go again. Hands in there. Come on, we'll have a race.
You don't have to say a blessing or anything on the...
No.
I
Go
see
on,
it
sling him in.
Right. Of all your menu here, how much of it is Eastern European Jewish food?
I think probably 70%. Looking good. So, look at him.
Wow. Do you think I made that one?
100% it's got your name on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it says Simon. Right then, so the proof of the knedel is in the tasting. I'll give you a bit of loction. Yep.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah. I'm going to go for the...
Dumpling, have to break it up.
Yeah. There's a bit.
Are they as good as your mother's? You better say better.
I think I've got a long way to go, but yeah, they're pretty good, yeah. I think I'd make a good Jewish
Wife.
wife one day, yeah.
Yeah.
No, husband.
Postman.
Husband.
I've got a hearing ingredient.
Wow, this is really good. Even if I do say so myself.
The Jews who came to Leeds in the late 19th century were Ashkenazi Jews. Their roots were thousands of miles away in the area around Vilna, now called Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. Back then it was part of Tsarist Russia. Since childhood, I've known the story of my ancestors. From the late 19th century onwards, they had to escape Russia because of poverty and pogroms, large-scale targeted anti-Jewish violence. Their history is my history. My great-grandmother Rebecca Miller and her husband-to-be, Barnett Goldberg, were among those immigrants.
I know that they both came from near Vilna. These are their ID books. And it's quite interesting to see what they look like around the age that I am now. Rebecca was born in 1888. She came over when she was 18. Barnett, I think, was much younger. I think he was about 12. He was an only child, whereas Rebecca, I think, was from a much bigger, quite religious family. I've always been very interested in the family history, and knowing where you come from, gives you a stronger sense of your identity. It gives you that appreciation of what you are and how you come to be.
This is the first glimpse those Jewish immigrants would have had of Britain, the docks at Hull.
I've never been to this part of Hull before, and it feels like the end of the world. And beyond it is just this expansive sea. It's where they came in. It's a very eerie feeling, especially with it being so quiet. From what I've heard, back then this place would have been teeming with boats, and the sights and the smells that my great-grandparents must have seen and felt coming through here is nothing compared to what we see here today. So this is where my great-grandmother would have first come through.
Yeah, precisely. Her point of arrival in the UK, having navigated the River Humber, was this dock through this double set of dock gates, and she would have disembarked just on the right-hand side where those sandy-coloured buildings are now.
What would the journey have been like?
Horrible, absolutely horrible. It was a journey which took between 5 and 7 days, depending on the weather.
Really?
The North Sea was incredibly rough, and so it was a particularly difficult conditions for people who were not used to travelling on land, let alone on water.
Right.
So it was a horrific journey. Onto the top deck of the vessels that were transported were horses bound for the Yorkshire coalfields, and so the actual horses were fed very well, and therefore the byproduct of that was that there would be natural animal excreta swamped on their heads, flowing along some of the decks, and it was really a horrific experience.
Why did they come to Yorkshire? Why Hull? Why here?
They left for a variety of reasons: to avoid persecution, to avoid military conscription, but predominantly to earn new money, to improve conditions for their children.
Right, yeah.
Even if they didn't improve their life and the quality of their life, their kids got a better education, their kids had a much better chance to earn more money. And so your opportunities now were enabled by the facilitators of the past, your ancestors. Their suffering in the past to them was nothing. Their life's obsession was the future,
right.
A future that was freer, fairer, and more democratic, in which they could be respected as people, whether they were Jewish or not.
Many of the new arrivals came from shtetls, small Jewish communities in the countryside. So did Rebecca Miller. Travelling on her own, Hull must have seemed a very strange new world.
Well, it's amazing to see this place so well preserved like this. This is where my great-grandparents and their whole generation would have first come when they landed straight off the boat. I've never been here before, but this was part of their journey. To me, this doesn't look so foreign, but to them it must have seemed incredibly different compared to what they would have been used to back home. These platforms look pretty derelict now, but I imagine back then there would have been whole families, villages of people trying to wrestle together to find a space on the train. It would have taken them to somewhere they were hoping would have been better than where they came from.
In the late 19th and early 20th century, around 2.5 million Jewish migrants left Russia and Eastern Europe. 250,000 came to Britain. The result was the Aliens Act of 1905. For the first time, the British government brought in a law to restrict immigration.
Immigration to Britain lessened, and increasingly there was a greater scrutiny of the type of migrant who came.
The Act was initially aimed at criminal elements amongst immigrants, but it quickly developed into an anti-Jewish act, and the word alien became a code word really for Jews.
All this probably didn't mean much to my family. They were living in the only place they could afford, the Leylands, the poorest and unhealthiest part of Leeds.
This is the inner city area where most of the Jews first came when they settled, including my own great-grandparents.
My great-grandmother Rebecca Miller was following in the footsteps of her two older brothers and her uncle Abraham, who'd already arrived from a village near Vilnius. They lived in the Leylands, but there's little trace of it now.
Excuse me? Yeah? Do you know where the Leylands are?
No, sorry.
Do you know where the Leylands is?
No,
the Leylands? No.
How are you spelling it, sir?
L-E-Y, L-A-N-D-S, the Leylands.
Somewhere around here.
Leylands Road.
So it's saying it's up there. And then take a right.
I found the site of the first place Rebecca Miller lived in Leeds, the home of her uncle Abraham.
I think it's about here. I think it's about here in the middle of this car park. Yeah, just raised all of it to the ground.
Soon after, she met and married another Jewish immigrant, my great-grandfather, Barnett Goldberg.
This is Concord Street. This is where my great-grandfather came to live. You know, he was doing tailoring work when he came over here. My great-grandmother came to live with him as well on Concord Street, which, as you can see, has changed quite a bit since the days that they were living here. The whole area would probably be unrecognisable to anybody who lived there at the time. There's probably not a lot of what would have been a square mile where the whole of the Jewish community was packed in, effectively like a ghetto, you know, cornered by several streets. There's nothing of it left, unrecognisable.
I'm with Diane Saunders, who's researched Jewish history in Leeds. A small part of the old Jewish area still existed when she was young. Her grandparents left Eastern Europe for Leeds at the same time as Rebecca and Barnett.
This is North Street?
This is North Street.
So, and there would have been a parade of shops over there?
The shops are brilliant on North Street. When I was a little girl, I was at school in the centre of Leeds, so I came down North Street every morning, and the shops were butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, tailoring shops, lots of tailoring shops. It was bustling as North Street.
Can we get you bagels and smoked
salmon? Get your bagels
salmon?
and get your schmaltz herring and all those things.
So it really would have been an epicentre for
Yes.
Jewish
Yes.
culture
Yes, it was.
and recreational life.
Yes, it was. The community would have existed around family life and synagogue life. So people would have been much more religious and much more observant than they are today. Although life was difficult, there was a lot of fun. It wasn't wall-to-wall misery.
Diane and I are watching BBC Archive from 1980, with first-hand testimony from people who lived in the Leylands in the early part of the 20th century.
At last they recognised something, the smells of fried fish, chicken feathers burning.
There was three types of people. There was the poor, the very poor, and them that had nothing.
They crowded as many people in as possible, and they not only let rooms off, but they left corners of rooms off. In some rooms, there were 4 couples.
There was my father, my mother, 7 children, and one of my younger sisters suffered from epileptic fits. And in this same room, he had his tailor shop.
Their parents were peasants. They came from a long line of peasants, and they came, hopefully, to make a better life for themselves. The Leeds housing has always been fairly dense, but the Leylands were more than dense. My mum's family, there were 3 girls followed by 5 boys. And my mum said it was really convenient because the 3 girls went out to work for the 5 boys to be educated. And the elder uncle, my Uncle Henry, he said that there was nowhere to study, so he would study under the table.
Really?
Yeah, with the tablecloth.
What, in the main room of the house?
Yes, yeah. It was the only space he could find so he could read his books and study. One of the main differences between Jewish immigration to Leeds and other immigration is that the Jewish people hardly ever looked back. They rarely went back home. They didn't yearn of home. Whereas the Irish, the Scottish, the Polish, the Italians, they would have yearned of going home. But we didn't. So we came to Leeds, feet on the ground, looking forward.
It's over 100 years since my great-grandmother arrived in Leeds, and she never returned to Eastern Europe. The links to those times in her past are long gone and rarely spoken of in the family. I do know her husband Barnett continued working as a tailor, as did many of my family. It was a tough existence.
The majority were only concerned to exploit their workers as much as possible.
Anne Kirshen has studied the history of the Jewish tailoring trade. Leeds led the way in mass production of clothes. But like thousands of others, Barnett would have worked long hours in overcrowded workshops. So tailoring was pretty much the main occupation of all the immigrants who came over?
It was the prime occupation. There were other occupations, of course, but tailoring was the most favoured, and you could enter it if you were unskilled.
Yes. How much exploitation was there?
Exploitation was the name of the game. You'd work your employees, and there was subdivision, which meant that the workshop master didn't necessarily pay all the workers. So you'd have a machiner who would pay his under-machiner, you'd have a presser who would pay his under-presser, and each one exploited the other.
Were Jewish employers any better?
I was referring to Jewish employers. They would exploit their workforce. I mean, you know, the ideology in a way was, well, I came over, I suffered like that, you can suffer the same way. And the workers, although they formed trade unions from time to time, put up with the exploitation because they needed the money. The dream was the immigrant would come to the promised land, he would see the promised land, but the children would enjoy it.
For some, their new life in Leeds brought golden opportunities. One prominent pioneer was Michael Marks from Poland, founder of Marks & Spencer, who set up a stall here in Leeds Market.
Marx's original stall would be about 100 yards further down on the outside edge.
Oh, right. So it wouldn't have been on this spot?
It wouldn't have been on this spot. He wouldn't have had, I mean, you're not going to give him a prominent position.
No, of course.
As a new immigrant.
Nice fruit. When Marks eventually moved to his first shop, it was in a prime shopping arcade nearby. With his business partner Thomas Spencer, he went on to build a retail empire. The other big success story was Montague Burton, who came from Lithuania. By the late 20s, sweatshops were being replaced by factories. Working conditions were better. There were canteens and health checks. And Burton built a huge factory in Leeds that revolutionised the way men's clothing was produced.
We're about to go and visit the last remaining Jewish tailors in the city centre, where there was, at one time, maybe a community of 20,000 people or something, where most of them were employed as tailors. Over the course of 100 years, there's only two, within a stone's throw of that area, the Breitbart brothers.
Mervyn and Clive are twins. They've worked together for 40 years.
Hi, I'm Simon.
Hi, good to meet you.
What's your name?
Mervyn.
Mervyn, nice to meet you, Mervyn. And
Clive.
Clive, nice to meet you, Clive. How are you?
Not so bad.
Good. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks
good.
very much.
Yeah, pleasure.
Have you always been tailors, the two of you?
We have, yes.
And so has it always been in the family?
It has, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When having always been here, we had a factory. Yeah. Lots of photos. Let's have a look.
Yeah, if you've got any photos, that'd be great. Yeah. Wow. So this was the factory here, and was it your father's?
Former factory and his brothers.
Oh, these are incredible photos.
Yeah. This my father. He used to go on travel in different cities.
These are fascinating. How many people did?
About 200.
Really? Yeah. Compared to Burton's, were they?
Burton's used to employ thousands.
Oh, really?
It's gone. When we gone, I don't think there were any tailors left.
Yeah. Any Jewish tailors?
No.
Yeah. It's a shame when
It's a shame. Yeah.
Yeah, when you think about how many there were. It's something I've known nothing about. I've never even taken up my own trousers or anything.
Sometimes you can just pull it and they'll come away.
I hope I make generations of Glass and Goldbergs very happy.
Make sure you don't cut the cloth. Just pull that.
Oh, right. Do you have any apprentices?
No.
You're not looking for one at the moment?
No.
Maybe after this will change your mind.
I'm not saying anything.
There we go. Yeah.
Very good. That's it.
Just like that.
Yeah, this is quite hard to do.
Okay. I'm up for a challenge.
And you put your foot down like that.
Just like that? And then that's done?
I've done here, they will turn.
Oh.
And then you
let it go there, okay. Yeah. Is that in the right place?
Yeah, fine.
These aren't anybody's trousers?
No.
They're not going to be coming with them?
No, they won't be.
You're not going to be in any trouble?
No. Just put your foot on there.
Okay. It's like driving a car?
Yeah. Go on.
I'm just a bit worried, yeah. Oh.
Fine.
Okay.
Go on.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah, that was a bit fast, yeah. Shall I open that up?
Off.
Okay. Well, how far did I get up?
Not very far.
Would that be able to go back out to a customer?
No.
Well, I hope I made my ancestors happy with that.
Sure you did.
There's still time.
2 or 3 years, you'll be okay.
2 or 3 years. All right.
Or maybe 5. Yeah, not bad at all.
Yeah. All right.
Long before we came to Leeds, welfare to others was always at the centre of the Jewish faith. In the shtetls, it began with making sure everyone had food and shelter. Jewish welfare is still alive today.
We've continued to support the community and a real change in role over the past 140 years.
Right, that long?
That long. I don't look it, but yeah, that long.
Yeah.
We still have a huge heritage of looking after each other.
This afternoon we're having a concert, and the band have agreed to let me help out. These days our community isn't what it was. 100 years ago there were over 25,000 of us in Leeds. Now we're down to around 10,000. But this is a community that still has its own sense of identity, and it's a big part of who I am. For me, there's one painting that sums up the spirit of how it feels to be a Leeds Jew. It's here in the City Art Gallery, painted in 1919 by the Leeds artist Jacob Kramer, a Jewish migrant from Ukraine. This is the Day of Atonement. I remember first seeing it when I was about 15. Our school brought us in here, and up until that point, being Jewish was very much something that I was hiding. It was the first time that I'd seen my own identity, men in their shawls, the black and white, the monochrome look that you associate so much with, or I associate so much with the synagogue and Judaism, being reflected for everybody in the city to see. I think it was at that point that I really thought, well, this is something I should take on as part of my identity and not be ashamed anymore. He captures that Jewish spirit and Jewish soul. You can't help but feel centuries of weight that they're carrying on them, almost searching for identity and wanting to belong somewhere.
Prayer for the royal family.
But Leeds has always been a tolerant place. There's been more of an acceptance of a person's faith. The English have a sense of fair play, and providing you do not interfere with what they're doing, usually they don't interfere with what we're doing.
Everlasting kingdom, and may he bless our sovereign Lady Queen Elizabeth, Philip Duke of Edinburgh, Charles Prince of Wales.
Basically, it was a miracle that there was such a place, that we were able to come and feel safe, and that we were fortunate we didn't finish up in, our ancestors didn't finish up in the concentration camps or in the gas ovens at Auschwitz.
Mm. The faces are very familiar. They look like faces that I grew up with. I suppose they come from the same part of the world, Eastern Europe. Even though they're 120 years apart, there's still a real sense of familiarity about them. The sentence here, some of the older immigrants boast that they're Yorkshiremen, but rarely qualify themselves as Englishmen. One identity that you wear with pride, and the other one that you slightly hide. Wherever you go in the world, you're always proud to tell anybody that you're from Yorkshire, whereas being Jewish is, well, it depends whereabouts in the world you go, you know. It can be taken in different ways. It wouldn't be the first piece of information I'd offer up, whereas interestingly, you know, you never ask a Yorkshireman where he's from, because he'll have already told you in the first sentence. By the 1930s, some of the Jewish community in Leeds were doing well for themselves. They were starting to move out of tailoring and into the professions, medicine and law. And by now, they were starting to feel at home. They worked together, socialised together, and took the chance to enjoy themselves. Meanwhile, the slums of the Leylands were being demolished. My grandparents' generation were moving north into the wealthier suburbs, and their lives, including their sports and social activities, were being recorded on film. Alec Barron was an amateur filmmaker, the son of Eastern European Jews. From the 30s to the 60s, he recorded his own family life and the Jewish world he saw around him. I'm meeting his widow Judith and their daughter Helen.
That's Michael, my eldest. Scarborough Beach.
Mm. What were the earliest memories that you both have of Alec filming with the family?
I do remember on family holidays that he would be walking backwards and direct you a little to do it again.
Yes, yeah.
There's lots of film as us as little children playing in the garden. I don't remember being filmed,
Right.
but I remember when I was older that getting the films out and watching them was a family amusement.
Was an ordinary father filming his children, and
I think it was pretty unusual, the fact that we had movie film of us. Other people had photograph albums.
So unknowingly he was documenting the community in its early stages, celebrating these weddings and birthdays.
Yeah. Early in the 30s, he managed to get together with a group of people who had the money to get cameras, and he started a little group to make films, and they did want to document things, but one of the ways that they managed to pay for what they were doing was to film weddings. And I think the Jewish community might have asked him to film some events, so there's one of the Remembrance Day parade, and that certainly must have been organised.
So he was quite entrepreneurial. I mean, just like a tailor would have had his sewing machine, Alec had his camera.
Entrepreneurial is absolutely what he was. If he wanted to do something and he would have big ideas and he would want to do it, he would want to do it properly.
What prompted him to capture the Judean Club and the Jewish community on film?
I think because he felt that it showed what the Jewish community did with their life, instead of just family life, which is also interesting, but this has a wider interest, doesn't it?
So I think that documenting the community would have been important to him. The group of friends that he did things with was a group of Jewish friends, mostly from school, and I don't know whether that was because there was anti-Semitism and the Jewish boys
Stuck together.
Stuck together because they weren't accepted in the
Yeah.
other society, or just it was natural.
Yeah.
His Jewish identity was always very important to him.
There were two Christian boys at each side of this road, and they was holding a sort of a washing line, quite taut, as much as to say, you don't go any further. And they said to this boy that I was with, what do they call you? And he said, Abram Iazovsky. And they said, are you Jewish? He said, no, Church of England. So he says, right, you can go through. He says, now, what about you? I said, I'm the same as him. He says, right, you can go through.
Who killed our Lord? It was always the same story. So eventually I got fed up of getting blows and black eyes and hit, so I turned around to him and I said, it wasn't me. He said, who killed our Lord? I said, it wasn't me, it was my uncle in Manchester. So he let me off.
I'm back with Ira Silverman. Our families lived in the same streets, and they found that the 1930s weren't a safe time to be Jewish. Who's this here?
That's my grandfather on my father's side.
Okay, and what's his
He was
name?
a tailor.
What was his name?
His name was Ted Silverman. He was a member of the Communist Party.
In Leeds?
Yeah, apparently so. And most Jews were members of the Labour Party.
Did you know that the fascist leader Oswald Mosley and his black shirts came to march in Leeds in the 1930s?
I didn't know through my grandfather. I knew later on from history at school.
Do you think it could have been possible that he was
I think
there?
it's highly likely, don't you?
Yeah.
I do. I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that he would be there.
What if the fascists came marching here in Moortown? Would you be on the
100%? Would you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I stood right behind you.
Right, that's on my side.
Yeah. Well, I'll push you forward. Oswald Mosley staged rallies around Britain in cities with migrant populations, targeting areas where he thought local people could be divided. In 1936, he came to Holbeck Moor in Leeds.
The press reports were that there were 20,000 to 30,000 anti-fascists busting from across the north. A lot of them obviously came from Leeds, the Jewish community.
Yes, yeah.
And they would had, 1,000 of the black shirts in their Nazi-like uniforms with the peak caps, the riding breeches. They looked pretty menacing.
Why Leeds?
Well, Leeds was seen as ripe for this campaign. It had quite a large Jewish community. And there was a deliberate attempt to provoke the Jewish community. They saw it as an opportunity to increase membership. And so often, if there was a a violent response from the anti-fascists, they welcomed it. And it became violent. It's quite clear some of the anti-fascists were ready for Mosley's men, and there was an incident where they started stoning them.
Right.
The anti-fascists knew Mosley's men were coming. There had been a plan, I believe, for Mosley's men to march through Leeds,
right,
particularly through the Jewish areas in Leeds. There had been attacks there, graffiti, some of the windows of shops have been smashed and things like that.
Much of which happened in Germany only a few years before.
It did. You have to say that it was at a level much, much lower than Germany, though if you were actually living there at the time, it would have looked very provocative because the Jewish community knew what was happening in Germany.
In the lives of great nations comes the moment of decision, comes the moment of destiny.
Mosley was one of the great orators of the 20th century, there's no doubt about that.
And I claim that in the ranks of our black shirt legions march the mighty ghosts of England's past.
But there's a problem with rhetoric. You're kind of taken up to the mountain, but what happens next? At the end of the day, the British public are not very keen on people who dress up in uniforms.
Mosley failed to divide the people of Leeds, but being British and Jewish is still complicated, particularly for me. My mother's family is Jewish, but my father's family is not. And I've often asked, how do I define myself?
I go around calling myself Jewish, or I've been brought up as Jewish, but really what does that mean? I know that my mother comes from a very European Jewish family, and to really find out what that means, if that's an ethnic makeup, that's what I want to find out by doing this DNA test. So the top result, as I would have gathered, was European Jewish. So 39% European Jewish. The main concentration of it is around Lithuania, Latvia, which I had a feeling, but Belarus and Ukraine as well, and a bit of Poland. But it's strange to see that something like being Jewish can actually be defined as an ethnicity. You know, it's not like just a culture that you can turn on and off, or a religion that you can dip in and out of. It's there. It's 39%.
I'm back with Nick Evans. He's been researching my great-grandmother's past and has located the village Vasilishok, where Rebecca was brought up.
You're probably familiar with Northern Europe, Sweden and Norway, but less is often known about Russia. Your family came from a village between Grodno and Vilna, and so this was on a main rail route.
And Vilna was known as the Jerusalem of the North.
Precisely.
Because of a large Jewish population.
Very strong population, very strong religiosity, particular Jewish identities and global notoriety. And therefore it was really a key spiritual place for Jews. And so this really Jerusalem of Russia, as you describe, was actually on a close railway route. All the way up here, and from here they could travel over to Britain.
Now I know where Rebecca's from, I want to be the first in my family to go back. I never met Rebecca. She died before I was born. All I've got are fleeting images from old family films.
The first time I saw this archive footage of my great-grandmother, I remember seeing this very unusual, small but strong woman. There was no sound with it, so I could never hear how she spoke, and she was just such a curiosity. But nobody really gave me any more than that.
She didn't really talk very much because she spoke in Yiddish, and so English was her second or third language.
In a way, maybe she cut the ties just by not speaking about it anymore. What was in the past was villages and, you know, the poverty that she'd left behind.
The last of Rebecca's children, my Auntie Flo, was born in the Leylands in Leeds. She's 99 years old. I want to find out what she can remember about her mother and the old days.
Where's your mother on this?
Becky.
Becky?
Yeah, Rebecca, Becky.
Rebecca. And where
They called her Rebecca.
She's a beautiful woman.
My mother was like me. She was beautiful.
Is that where I get it from? So what was she like?
My mother was a very beautiful woman. The men were both, he was a chaser. Both my father fell in love with her. And she fell in love with my father. And they married.
And was she a strong woman?
Very.
Where was your mother born?
My mother, born in Russia.
Where do you know where?
I don't know where. Born in bed.
And so, did they ever tell you about where they came from?
No, they didn't tell you.
So, do you have any last words of advice for me before I go?
And you won't find any.
It's frustrating. I know there are stories that remain untold. I want to see where Rebecca came from and what happened to the relatives she left behind. To dig deeper, I've got to leave Yorkshire and go to the ancestral home of the Jews of Leeds and my great-grandparents.
When I was growing up as a kid, the synagogue that I went to was the Vilna synagogue, and I'd hear all my older relatives and all of their friends talk about Vilna, and to me it was like this mythical place. It's only in recent years that I understand that it's Vilnius, it's the modern-day capital of Lithuania.
Until the Second World War, Vilnius was home to 100,000 Jews. Before I go to Rebecca's family village, it's important to understand what happened here. In June 1941, the Germans arrived. Soon, the Nazis began rounding up the Jews. Many of these people had relatives who'd emigrated to the UK half a century before. The whole Jewish population was walled up in the Vilnius ghetto, a square mile, no bigger than the Leylands in Leeds. By 1944, they were gone. But Rebecca's relatives avoided the ghetto. They were 60 miles away in the village of Vasilishok, now known as Vasiliski. Rebecca Miller spent her childhood there, but by the outbreak of war, she was safely in Leeds, a middle-aged woman with children of her own. She was from a large family, some including her parents never emigrated. I want to learn more about where they lived and what happened during the war. First, I need to locate the old family home of Rebecca's father Chaim Miller and his brother Abraham. The Lithuanian State Archive has records of where they lived, dating back to the late 1800s.
So, Galina, what have you found from your archives?
You asked about the Miller family that lived in Vasilishki, yes?
Yes.
And I have found the lists for Vasilishki Jewish men, and I found the family Shlomo, son of Shmuel, who was 55 years old. They include the names of his 4 sons. The Shmuel, who was 28 years old and who was the oldest one. Yankel, who was 24 years old. Chaim, 22 years old. And Abraham, or Abram, who was youngest one. He was 14 years old.
Okay. But he was the first one, I know that he was the first one to come over to Leeds. And I know that my great-grandmother, she came from a family of 4 brothers who lived in Vasiliski, Vasilishok.
So I'm sure that it is the same family. Here is the map of Vasilishki, and here on yellow I show you exactly places
where Jews in the place lived.
Yes.
And there's a lot of them on here.
Yeah, you see that a lot of Jews lived in Vasilishki. And here on Vilnius Street, on the numbers 144 and 146, lived members of the Miller family.
Wow, that's incredible. So I could, if I went there, I could find the exact spots that they lived. They would have shopped there. They would have worshipped there.
Sure.
Wow, this is incredible. The borders around here have changed. Now I'm heading into Belarus to find Vasilishok, Rebecca's village, and the home of the Miller family. My guide is Regina Kapilovich. She studied the history of the Jews in this area.
So Regina, what was this place like 100 years ago?
The small towns, as in Vasilishki, for example, in 1866 they had more than 60% of Jewish population. But you should keep in mind that they were always surrounded by the local people.
And how long would Jews have lived in this place for?
From the 16th, 17th century.
Okay, so it's possible to trace my family back over 300 years.
Possible.
So what would this place have been like 100 years ago?
So it will be in vicinity, the market square. Peasants from the surrounding villages would bring their merchandise. They will bring the chicken and eggs and fruit and vegetable, and they will sell it, and the Jewish people would buy them and afterwards retail it further into the bigger cities.
So there's this church behind us that still exists, but most of what we see here is not how it would have been 100 years ago.
No, it would be older houses. So this is the old synagogue. And you can see that chimney is very old, and this window.
Regina believes Rebecca's parents, Chaim and Annie, died before the war. But in the early 1940s, her cousins and their children still lived in the village.
From the map yesterday, Galina said that the plot was 144 to 146. So it would have been this side of the road.
For sure. Should be somewhere over here to my mind. Also this diagonal, like a lining of the plots on the map from 160 years ago looks the same direction as the gardens at the moment.
So that the land markings probably wouldn't have changed too much.
The cat agrees.
So possibly it could have been right here.
At least from the eye, it seems like this is a spot.
So this orchard over here and this house is probably where they lived and had their land.
Or in the vicinity, and it will be the same apple trees and the same pears and the same cherries and the same fruit.
Then, one day in 1942, Nazi soldiers arrived in the village. Teresa Ginel-Gulbatsky has lived here all her life.
Teresa, what do you remember of the day?
В этот день я помню, как из гетто евреев все выгоняли туда, в парк, но и делили их направо, налево. И вот и с детьми даже малыми шли, ну, родители. И вот так их ложили, вот так, в ряд всех на землю. И там из наших людей много, кто, знаете, так обидно, все соседи. И всегда так мирно жили с нами. И мы так только слышим сразу, гомон такой. И слышим, уже стрелы пошли. Они как поднялись уже, тогда мужчины поняли, что надо удирать. Они уже поняли, что их будут стрелять. И тогда они пошли немножко кто направо, кто налево удирали они.
When Teresa witnessed what happened that day, she was 10 years old.
And to this place, they brought almost all population of Vasilishok,
And
Jewish.
this was in 1942. 1942?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were actually slaughtered in the cold blood.
Right.
Out of this, 7 people were not killed. But when they tried to escape, out of 7, only 1 survived.
Okay, and these were all residents of this town?
They were all local. So at least there was a Shaul Kushner who was an eyewitness of what had happened over here.
Mm-hmm.
Who, after months of hiding, he actually survived and made his way to America.
Really?
Unfortunately, it was also the members of your family. We have his Miller family. So we have over here several Miller families. So we do not have the exact number, but they certainly were more than 10.
But several of the family were still in the village at that time?
Certainly they were your relatives. Yes. This is a mass graves over here for all the people of Vasilishok.
You know, I've been to I've been around Europe before and seen lots of you know, concentration camps, but never did I think that my family would be, you know, among those killed. It's very difficult to see.
And especially they were killed inside of the village, you see? They were not even sent somewhere far away. It's very tragic.
And so these outlines just here, so this one here,
mass graves,
and this one here. So how many people altogether were killed?
We say over here that it's certainly more than 2,000.
And they were rounded up from just one day. They were rounded up from their homes.
It was on the 10th of May, 1942.
The story I always thought stopped after my great-grandmother came over, because she was the last one to come. Her brothers came over, and then she came over. And I think for most of my family, that's where they drew a line. You know, life over here, they drew a line under. And to know that there were still people that didn't really make it, you know, you kind of feel like they were left behind. They didn't have the opportunity that she had.
See, also after the war, it was in many families that even the older people, they knew that they had relatives which were killed, you know. They did not want to be exposed to this information.
Well, yeah, I think even for my mum's generation, my great-grandmother would have kept these facts
silent.
They kept silent because they just wanted to brush it under the carpet. But
you see, they are so lucky they have you, because your grandparents were bold enough to go into complete unknown and to have you as a posterity. There are many families over here which did not have the people who went out. And so we encourage the younger people to be interested in the roots, just to commemorate these people.
Yeah.
So it's very important for you to come over here, I think.
Yeah, I feel so. It's I never thought I'd find a place, you know, that I could call a home other than where I call in England. But somehow in London, I've never. Somehow in England, it's never always felt like the complete home. But coming over here, at least this is one more step back that I can say this is the home that I come from. This was where my ancestors came from.
אמצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי שכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיעה מזכירים את נשמתם.
קדושי ושילי שוק,
שחלכו לעלמם, בעבור נדב לצדקה, לכן בעל חרחמים, יסתרחו בסדר כנפי שכינה את נשפתם, בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
אמן.
Hi, Mum. It's me.
Dip it in the honey, and we hope you have
Sweet
and happy New Year.
It's Jewish New Year, and I'm with my mum, brother Jacob, and aunts Janet and Linda.
There were 4 brothers that all lived in this village.
Oh, that is wonderful. I never thought we went any further back than my grandmother's day.
And they also had documents that said the exact plot of their land on here. We met this woman called Teresa, and she remembers a day that the Nazis came into the town and rounded up all of the Jews from the village. Killed every single one of them, with some of our family included as well.
And they didn't have a chance.
My grandma never talked about it. She talked a couple of times about the village that she was in, that she lived in.
And my friends told me they didn't talk about it either. It was that generation. I mean, it must have been traumatic to lose all your family at one go.
I think there was guilt and, they just didn't want to think about what had happened, and fear, and, they'd started a new life here, and yeah.
Back home, I'm thankful for my family and our community, and the life we have in Leeds.
What I saw over there is not what any living member of my family has seen. But maybe now, having seen what I've seen, I suppose I feel proud that I'm Jewish, knowing that I'm different and that being different isn't necessarily such a bad thing.